Hi, my name is David Bergenson with Aware, and welcome to the Weather Challenge. In this short video, we're going to show how we've been using some of the tools around the world to help you understand what's going on using our data and tools on the Adapter platform. The link to that is provided below, so you can explore how weather's actually changed where you live, and we'll provide some other links to blogs to give you some ideas of how you can use these resources. So we're going to have a look at different parts of the world, starting with Brazil, just to see how weather has actually changed in its impact on our forests, on our farming, and just on our communities. And so in the case of Mato Grosso, Brazil, the Amazon rainforest has been under attack due to logging as well as wildfires. And in 2020, wildfires were particularly damaging in this area. What we're seeing is that the weather patterns are actually causing shifts in agriculture, but also causing stress in natural resources such as the Amazon forests. And so what we see in the weather graph for this particular area is that rain is particularly important during the winter months for the northern hemisphere, which are the summer months for the southern hemisphere. And so we're going to focus particularly on January through March. And we can see that this is where the rainfall is predominantly taking place. But we saw that in 2021, it was actually quite dry. The rain started off well, but then dropped off dramatically. And so this had an impact on the precipitation. And what we've seen over the last 15 years is that the rainfall in this area for the months January have dropped rather dramatically. And so this is one of the reasons why the wildfires have been so damaging. If we jump over to the United States, we see a similar situation in the west coast of California, where national forests such as Mendocino are under attack by wildfires due to dry conditions during the winter months. Studies have shown that this has been forecasted for the next 30 years, that as conditions dry, the prevalence of forest fires will increase dramatically. But what we're actually seeing is an acceleration of that. The winter months in the northern hemisphere, January to March, and in these months is when we normally see a lot of rainfall, but last year we did not see that rainfall materialize, and therefore downward trend in rainfall year over year, and in the last few years in particular, 2020, extremely dry year. So these insights help us to get ahead of risks such as forest fires, to make sure we put in place policies that mitigate against those risks. Now, if we jump over to Africa to have a look at the central part of Kenya, Kitui County of Kenya is seeing a similar situation. It's dryland agriculture kind of ecology, in which smallholder farmers have been really challenged to understand when the rains are starting and what crops they should be cultivating in response to climate change. And so the Kenyan government has been very proactive in this regard. A lot of studies have documented that farmers are actually changing their cropping practices. And so again, if we look at the rainy season here in what we call the short rains that take place from October to January, we can see that in both cases, 2020 was a good year for rainfall, but 2021 was actually a poor start to the growing season for farmers. And this variability between years is really difficult for farmers to manage. And so therefore they need access to weather information localized to help them understand when is the best time to plant and what crops they should be cultivating. If we see that over time, it too has been showing a downward trend, and we use an index called precipitation divided by potential evapotranspiration. A value of 1 can support most crops, but as that value goes below 1, we run into the risk of drought conditions. That's what we saw last year, even in 2020, and going into 2021 for farmers in this location of Kenya. If we move over, heading east to Madagascar, we see there too that climate change is really posing challenges. A lot of the examples now we've shown around natural resources and agriculture, but even in the arena of health, climate change is having an impact. And so we need to be ahead of this, both in providing appropriate health and nutrition recommendations so communities can become more resilient to climate change. And a World Bank report published in 2018 highlighted the kinds of interventions that are needed, particularly in climate services. And so when we look over to Madagascar, we see here too the rainfall variability over the course of the year. Again, looking at the months of January, February, March, is much lower than it was anticipated. This orange line here is the long-term normal. The bars here are the actual rainfall, and you can see it's dramatically lower. This is causing conditions for drought. Now, it was highly variable last year, but this variability that we're seeing, in particularly rainfall, the temperature has not changed too much, although we can see that compared to the long-term normal, the current max temperatures are getting a little bit hotter, the black line indicated here, than the normal, which can stress from a physiological perspective human health. And if we look at the rainfall for this particular part of Madagascar, here too we see a dramatic drop over the last 15 years in the actual rainfall, causing stress to crops and to people. And finally, we're going to stop over in India to northeastern state of Odisha. It's home to literally millions of smallholder farmers who largely cultivate rice, but also other companion crops. And what's happening here is that rainfall variability is having a huge impact on farmers' ability to adapt both to drought as well as to flooding conditions. And especially flash floods that are taking place during the rainy season are causing particular problems for farmers in washing not only their crop but also their soil away. And so when we look at the rainy season here, which is starting in the months of March, April, building up to the monsoon, we see that last year there were extremely heavy rains, these blue bars, compared to the long-term normal, the orange line. And so this is a real problem for farmers to manage this excess water and flooding and erosion that results from it. So what we see here is in this part of the world, unlike the previous examples, we see a trend towards increasing rainfall during the early months of the monsoon. In this case, it's for the month of May. And that rainfall has been increasing. It's still highly variable, which is a problem for farmers, but in general, it's been increasing. So these are a few examples around the world of how you can use weather data to understand what's going on, to explain some of the biological processes of agriculture and forestry and why we're seeing these wildfires so difficult to control, or why we're seeing increased flooding, or why are we seeing increased incidence of communicable diseases due to the availability of vectors like mosquitoes due to the excess rainfall, for example. So please do join us in this challenge to understand how weather is actually changing, and write a brief story about how weather has actually impacted your location over the last 15 years and how you've had to adapt to that.